The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be.
His main theme that he repeated so often in this TV series and also in his public lectures is that the universe is all there is, all there was, all there will ever be. So that leaves no room for God, for supernatural.
Yes, in fact, the cosmos, which he always spelled with a capital C, becomes a sort of God substitute. In the Bible, God is described as he who was and is and will be, and he substitutes in the place of God the cosmos, which is all there ever was, is, or will be, which is a statement of atheism. And this isn't proven. There's no argument given for it. It's definitional for him. This is the point from which he starts. He assumes that atheism is true and then works out the consequences. And I thought what was interesting with Sagan is that he had an almost religious awe of the cosmos. It really did become a sort of God surrogate, an object of religious awe and wonder and transcendence. So for Sagan, the cosmos was more than just the universe. It really was a kind of substitute deity. And the wonder and awe at the cosmos took the form of a kind of cosmic religion.
Reminds me of a verse that Paul said that people would worship the creature rather than the creator. In other words, the things that were created rather than the creator who created them.
Right. The creation is something that ought to fill us with awe and wonder at its beauty and greatness and complexity, but that should redound to the glory of the God who designed and created it, rather than end simply in the created product itself.
The view that there's nothing apart from the material world goes by a number of different names: materialism, physicalism, naturalism, to name just a few. David Armstrong, who is a prominent naturalistic philosopher, defines naturalism in the following way. Naturalism, he says, is the doctrine that reality consists of nothing but a single, all-embracing spatio-temporal system. Naturalism is the doctrine that reality consists of nothing but a single, all-embracing spatio-temporal system. In other words, all that exists is the physical contents of space and time. Now, the question before us this evening is that true? Is there nothing but physical objects in time and space? In his biography of the great Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, Norman Malcolm reports that Wittgenstein said that he sometimes had a certain experience which could best be described by saying that when I have it, I wonder at the existence of the world. I am then inclined to use such phrases as, how extraordinary that anything should exist, or how extraordinary that the world should exist. This mystery, which according to Aristotle lay at the very root of philosophy, is one which thoughtful naturalists cannot avoid. For example, Derek Parfit, a naturalist philosopher, agrees, and I quote, "No question is more sublime than why there is a universe, why there is anything rather than nothing." Now, experience teaches us, and here we can have our first premise, that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or else in an external cause. This first principle, I think, seems quite plausible, at least more plausible than its negation. Imagine, for example, that you were walking in the woods one day and came across a translucent ball lying on the forest floor. Now, you would naturally wonder where that ball came from and why it came to exist there. You would find it quite bizarre if someone told you that the ball just exists inexplicably. And increasing the size of the ball, say to the size of a boulder, or to the size of a house, or to the size of a planet, would do nothing to alleviate the sense of mysteriousness as to why the thing exists. Mere increase in size does not make the existence of the thing more explicable. Even if it were so big that it became coextensive with the universe, that would not do anything to eliminate the need for an explanation of its existence. So, according to this first principle then, everything that exists is either one of two types. The first type is something that exists by a necessity of its own nature. It exists necessarily. Examples? Well, many mathematicians believe that numbers, sets, and other mathematical objects exist in this way. If such entities do exist, they just exist necessarily without any cause of their being. Now, it's worth noting in passing that if such objects do exist, then we have already moved beyond materialism and physicalism, since such abstract objects are not physical entities. The other type of object is anything that has an external cause of its existence. Examples? Mountains, planets, galaxies, people. These have causes outside themselves which explain why they exist. Now, it's obvious, premise 2, that, well, actually, bring up premise 3. I have a different ordering than you do. Premise 3, skip to that. It's obvious that the universe exists. Now, it follows from that number 2, therefore, the universe has an explanation of its existence. Now, some philosophers have said that the universe should be an exception to the first principle, that everything has an explanation of its existence. Why? Why should the universe be an exception to premise 1? Well, they say because the explanation for any physical state of affairs, call it S, the explanation for any physical state of affairs, S, must be found in a causally prior state of affairs in which S does not exist. For example, the explanation why a certain horse exists is that two other horses were bred so that they caused the new horse to be conceived and so come into existence. So any explanation of the existence of the universe would have to be found in a causally prior state of affairs in which the universe does not exist. But, these philosophers object, since a physically empty world can't cause anything, the demand for an explanation of the existence of the universe becomes absurd. And so the first principle doesn't apply in the case of the existence of the universe. Well, the problem with this objection is that it clearly begs the question in favor of naturalism. For unless you assume in advance that the universe is all that there is, there's just no reason to think that the state of affairs causally prior to the existence of the universe that explains why the universe exists has to be a physical state of affairs. The explanation for why the universe exists could be a causally prior, non-physical state of affairs. And if you assume that that's just impossible, then you see you're already begging the question in favor of naturalism. So, what sort of explanation could the universe have? Well, it seems plausible, as 2 states, that if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Why? Well, because in this case, the explanation of the universe must be greater than the universe. Think of the universe. All of space and time. All of physical reality. So the cause of the universe would have to be beyond space and time. Therefore, it cannot be physical or material. Now, there are only 2 kinds of things that can fit that description. Either abstract objects like numbers, or else an intelligent mind. But you see, abstract objects can't cause anything. It's part of the definition of an abstract object that it can't cause anything or stand in causal relations. The number 7, for example, doesn't cause anything. And therefore it follows, final premise or conclusion, that therefore the explanation of the universe must be a personal, transcendent mind. There must be an unembodied mind which created the universe and explains why it exists, and that's exactly what people have traditionally referred to by the word God. Now, it's open to the naturalist to reply to this argument by insisting that while the universe does have an explanation of its existence, that explanation does not lie in an external cause, but rather in the necessity of the universe's own nature. Like numbers, the universe just exists necessarily. But this would be an extremely bold speculation which naturalists have not been eager to embrace. I think we have a very strong sense of the universe's contingency. We can conceive of a possible world in which no concrete objects exist. For example, a world in which only mathematical objects exist. Why should that be thought to be impossible? Moreover, I think there are good reasons for thinking that the universe does not exist by a necessity of its own nature. It's easy to conceive of the non-existence of any or all of the macroscopic objects that we observe in the world. In fact, prior to a certain point in the past, when the universe was very dense and very hot, none of these familiar objects did exist. So we know they're not necessary in their existence. Well, what about the fundamental building blocks of matter, fundamental particles like quarks? Well, again, it's easy to conceive of a universe in which all of the fundamental particles that compose macroscopic objects were replaced by other particles, other quarks. A universe which consists of an entirely different collection of quarks, for example, seems quite conceivable. But if that is the case, then it follows that the universe does not exist by a necessity of its own nature, because a universe which is composed of an entirely different collection of quarks would not be the same universe as this one. To illustrate this point, just ask yourself, could the shoes that you are wearing have been made of steel? Could the shoes that you're wearing now have been made of steel? Now, certainly you can imagine that you might have a pair of steel shoes which would be the same shape and style as the shoes that you're wearing. But that's not the question. The question is whether the very shoes that you have on could have been made of steel. And I think the obvious answer is, of course not. Those would be a different pair of shoes, not the same pair of shoes that you have on. And exactly the same is true of the universe. If the universe were composed of a different collection of quarks, or fundamental particles, it would be a different universe, not the same universe. And I don't think any naturalist would dare to suggest that some quarks, though looking just like ordinary quarks, have the occult property of being necessary in their existence, so that any universe that existed would have to include those quarks. It's all or nothing here. And nobody thinks that every quark exists by a necessity of its own nature. And it follows then that the universe doesn't exist by a necessity of its own nature either. So it seems to me that this first argument is a good reason for thinking that the explanation for why anything at all exists is to be found in a personal, transcendent mind which is necessary in its existence and which is the cause of the contingent universe.